Number 1. The bus. I don't think I have ever met anyone who likes taking a bus cross country. Buses are crowded, they have long layovers, and for some reason, it always seems to take longer to get anywhere on a bus than it does for any other form of transportation. Not to mention, if you've never ridden a Greyhound or something for a very long time, you might not know this, but they are incredibly difficult to sleep on. I've always had problems sleeping on them when I'm traveling, and often I would go days on a long trip with little to no sleep at all. But that is not the worst thing to happen to me while on a bus. I once had a really frightening experience. I had been in California for a few weeks. I was between places to live. I had a room waiting for me near the college I was going to attend in the fall. However, the lease on the room didn't start for almost a month after the lease on my current room had ended. In order to have a place to live, a friend of mine let me stay with him and his roommates in California for a month. When it was time for me to go home, I bought myself a bus ticket. The school I was going to go to was in Illinois, so I was going to spend over 3 days on that bus. I wasn't looking forward to it, but I was lucky for the first leg of the trip. The bus I was on was not crowded, and I was able to have my seat and the seat next to mine all to myself. That made it easy to sleep on the first night. However, the following afternoon, we made a stop. I don't recall what city it was, but so many people got on that bus, it was totally packed. I knew that wasn't going to make it too pleasant. The guy who sat next to me was a bit weird. He was also one of those people who didn't seem to know very much about personal space. That made me nervous enough. I mean, I'm a guy, which I should get out there. I didn't think he was a guy who was trying to come on to me or anything. He was just one of those people who would sit next to you and didn't care if his body parts ended up being in your personal space area. He also talked a lot, and he was one of those people who seemed to have no idea how loud he was talking. I'm sure you know the type. They are loud and even say private things very loud. I'm sure most of the time when he spoke, everyone on the bus would hear what he was saying. I mentioned the talking because of something that happened when we were driving. He leaned forward to grab a drink out of his bag. When he did, I could see inside his jacket, and he had a hunting knife, or what I assumed to be a hunting knife, strapped to it. When he sat back, he must have seen the shock on my face, and realized what I had seen. And for the first time since he'd gotten on the bus, he lowered his voice to a whisper. "Oh, don't worry about that," he told me. "I've just carried it on me for as long as I can remember." We stopped not long after that. Before getting off the bus, the man asked me where I was going. I told him, and he didn't respond back to me. He just left. Now, I mentioned how much I hate riding buses, but I didn't mention how often I have done it. I, in fact, have ridden cross-country buses dozens of times. So many times that you think that I would have gotten used to trying to sleep on them. But every part of what follows had never happened to me before. The driver of the bus was talking to someone on his phone, and after he did, he began to pull the bus to the side of the road. He announced to everyone that we were having a technical issue, but it was nothing to worry about. He was going to pull over, and everyone would have to get off of the bus. Right at that moment, the man sitting next to me got up and walked back to the back of the bus. He went into the bathroom. I just figured that he likely had to pee before getting off the bus. Everyone got off the bus, and when we did, I noticed several police cars behind the bus. I was surprised because I hadn't heard any police sirens, so I had no idea what to think about what was going on. But I did notice that the man who was next to me was still not off the bus. Officers went on the bus, and after a long while, they came off the bus. The man who was next to me was being let out in handcuffs. One of the other officers was holding the knife in a bag that I'd seen strapped to him. They put him in the car, and we were allowed to get back on the bus. My first assumption was that the driver had seen the knife on the man and called the police about it. Well, I was way off. The man was wanted in connection with a murder in the area that he had first gotten on the bus. He needed an ID to buy a bus ticket, so the bus company had his information. The police were able to get in touch with the driver, and the technical problem announcement was a ruse to get us off the bus safely. It's a little scary, knowing you were sitting next to someone who might be a killer. But the details of the story make it scarier. The man had originally bought a ticket to Kansas, but he changed the ticket to the town in Illinois that I was headed to at the stop where he had asked me where I was headed. The murder victim was a random person. It was not someone that he had known in any way. And that was the scariest part for me. Normally, if someone is going to just commit one murder, it will be someone they know. They will have a motive for doing it. If someone kills someone that they don't know, they are doing it for the kill. And that is the behavior of serial killers. Although we will never know, this man might have been a serial killer in the making, albeit a stupid one for giving his real information to the bus company, and by changing his destination, I may have been his intended next victim. I am very happy that we will never know the answer to that. Number 2. The alley. Ever just been in the complete wrong place at the complete wrong time? I guess we all have at some point. However, my experience could have ended up being a lot worse than it eventually was. This happened late on a very cold night. I live in the city, which one I won't mention, but I moved there right upon moving out of my parents' house. I went to school at a college in the city, but I maintained my own apartment. It was an efficiency apartment, you know, one of those apartments that is basically a dorm room. There was one room and a bathroom with a small kitchen set in the main room. It was winter break from school. I planned on spending part of the break, the time around Christmas, at home with my parents. But after that, I preferred to be back in my own apartment. Well, even then, however, being so used to campus life and being around people all the time, I was feeling pretty cooped up and alone. And I also wasn't getting the regular amount of both physical and mental stimulation I did while school was in. So I began sleeping very poorly. One night, I had tossed and turned for a long time, not wanting to give up on the possibility of getting to sleep. However, by about 2 a.m., that was too frustrating for me to do anymore. I got up and thought about watching television, but that wasn't enough for me. I decided that maybe I should go for a walk. I don't mind a cold walk as I like cold weather. And it was not only really cold that night, I realized it was lightly snowing too. However, this didn't bother me in the slightest bit. I headed out for my walk. I had been out for a while, and the streets were pretty dead because of the cold. After I had had my fill of walking around, I headed back to my apartment building. The cold was beginning to get to me finally, so I thought I would slip through some alleys in order to get back to my apartment as soon as possible. I slipped through into one of the alleys, cutting the way back to my apartment. I normally didn't like doing that at night, but it seemed like there was no one outside. The homeless community normally would be riding the trains at night, if they could have train fare, back and forth, in order to keep warm, and they really would have needed to keep warm that night. And I went down another alley, and I was surprised as I went on, because in this alley, there was a homeless guy in it. He was laying up against the wall of a building, by some trash cans. My first instinct was to just walk by him, and when you live in the city, as long as I have, you have to sometimes ignore homeless people. And I know it sounds harsh, but you can't help everyone in the world. But as I got closer and closer to the man, I began having questions about him even being alive. He didn't look like he was breathing or anything, so I actually got a bit concerned. I approached the man, cautiously, trying to see if he was alright. I still couldn't tell if he was breathing when I leaned in and said, "Hey there, are you..." I didn't get a chance to finish my question. The still man became extremely unstill. He jumped at me and something cut my arm. It only took me a second to realize the man was holding a knife, and he got me good on the arm. But the guy was still much weaker than me, and he was likely very, very cold and frozen, and I just ran out of the alley as fast as I could. He didn't follow me. Rather than go back home, I had to go to the emergency room. I got stitches and a tetanus shot. It was still light outside before I was able to get home, and finally get to bed. Number 3. Late night. When I was a teenager, I began getting a lot more freedom to do what I wanted. I wasn't really held to a curfew or anything like that. I normally didn't even have to tell my parents I was going somewhere before going. They just didn't seem to worry about me. I guess there were both good and bad implications about that. Well, when you're younger, and in a situation like this, I guess it makes sense that you might try and bend rules a little more and more each time, seeing how much you can eventually get away with. And by the time I was a senior in high school, even though I was only 17, I was sometimes taking the train to the city and spending the night there. My parents really didn't seem to notice. On this night, it wasn't anything like that though. I was just over at my friend's house playing video games. We played pretty late into the night, and it was very late by the time that I finally began to get tired. When I decided I needed to sleep, my buddy offered me to sleep over there, but I declined. I was tired, and I knew that I would only feel comfortable if I was home and in my own bed that night. So even though it was late at night, I decided to just walk home. My buddy lived across town from me, so it was a bit of a walk, but I didn't mind. In fact, I had gotten so used to walking around at night that I would occasionally take walks late at night just to be doing it. I enjoyed the loneliness of it. I think maybe my favorite part of the walk was when I walked through the park. It wasn't lit very well, and it was really, really dark. So I was able to sometimes walk through it at night and maybe freak myself out. Yeah, I'm one of those guys. I like to be scared, and it doesn't normally happen by watching movies or listening to videos on YouTube. And don't get me wrong, I really enjoy watching both of those things, but they don't scare me. It was probably around 3 o'clock in the morning when I was headed into the park. I went walking through it, and it didn't take very long until there was so little light that I could barely see where I was going. Fortunately, I had walked that path many, many times before, and the path I was walking on was asphalt, so I could hear my own footsteps on it. Not long after I'd been into the really dark part of the park, I have to admit that there was this part of me that really regretted doing it. You know how it is. You always want to scare yourself, but the few times you succeed, you begin to regret doing it. It's always a weird feeling for me, and it wasn't any different this time. My eyes would dart quickly from left to right. There was little light, but I tried my best to still be aware of my surroundings. It was hard not to imagine things in the darkness that really were not there. And of course my imagination was kicked into high gear. There were also, of course, noises, too. There were crickets and frogs, and the normal nighttime noises. And those were fine. But then I heard a noise that I hadn't expected. There were footsteps on the asphalt. I was pretty sure they weren't mine, too. However, I tried to tell myself that they probably were. My mind was of course playing tricks on me, because I put it in a position to do such. But it did sound like someone else was walking on the path with me. Now, even if there were, I guess that wasn't something to really be scared of. I mean, really, I couldn't always be the only person walking around late at night all the time. They might hear my footsteps and be as freaked out as I had been with them. I stopped for a moment. I wanted to make sure that I was hearing someone else's footsteps and not just my own or my imaginations. And when I stopped, I heard footsteps not far behind me continue to fall. I was about to tell the person, "Hey," but before I had the chance to, I felt fingers from behind touch me on the back of my neck. They moved forward just a little bit, but there were definitely two hands, and they were both touching either side of my neck. I didn't even know why I responded like I did. I completely lost control of my body and I took off at full speed. I ran like I'd never run before. I didn't even think of looking back. I just ran and ran. I ran out of the park. I ran down the next street. I ran into my neighborhood, and I didn't stop running until I reached my house. And the entire time I never looked back. Not one single time. I simply ran all the way home. Once inside, I locked the door and holed myself up in my room. I don't really know what happened, but I do know that experience changed me for a while. I didn't walk out in the dark for quite a while, and I didn't try to scare myself for quite a while either. Hey all, Killer Orange Cat here. If you did enjoy it, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, feel free to hit the subscribe button below and the bell, or wait for the icon of Ichigo the cat that will appear at the end of this closing. Leave me a comment to let me know what you thought of the video, and share it with someone you think might enjoy it. If you have a story you'd like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please email it to the address included in the description. But most important, make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.